Dr. Nemeth, welcome to my show.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, you've written this blockbuster of a book on happiness. I mean, devoted an entire book to the idea of happiness. So I hope you're going to tell us what it is, and you lean on two very big historical figures. Tell us about it.
Absolutely. This has been a kind of a work in progress in the back of my mind for almost 35, 40 years. I've seen a steady and slow decline in the happiness quotient of young people that I encounter. I've been teaching university and college students and high school students as well. I started my career doing that back in 1972. So this shows you how ancient I am. But as the time has gone
But you're
on,
full of wisdom.
yes, my mind still works well. I always tell people other things don't work well, but my mind is quite good right now. But and I see the distress, particularly in the secular institutions that I worked in young people. Their suicide rates are up, their addiction rates are skyrocketing, their general unhappiness with human existence is obvious. And I said, I have to do something for them dead and gone. I got to leave something behind, so somebody can see there is a plan for, or a recipe, or a formula for a really basically simple, happy existence. It's been tried and tested. It's been around for, I don't know, 3,000 years. It works, and that's why I wrote the book. I wrote it at the level of high school and college, because obviously I could sit here and do an esoteric examination of what happiness means. Anytime you go into Aquinas and Aristotle, you can get confused pretty quickly. So I wrote it at their level, and I popularized it to some extent so they could see that I understand how the real world is, but I also have some wisdom that comes from Aristotle and Aquinas that will help them navigate it. And that's why it's such a complex world.
So the book's called Finding Happiness in a Complex World, Rules from Aristotle and Aquinas. Just taking this quote from the book, most sensible people already know that a pristine and eternal state of happiness cannot be encountered in the temporal world, like this temporary existence, as it were. My question is, do we idealize happiness to an exaggerated degree in the Western world today?
I think it's a brilliant question, and I think it's absolutely true. I think, number one, people don't really know what happiness is. They think it's some type of ecstatic, frenetic joy where you're continually happy about everything. But the one thing that Aristotle and Thomas lay out is that it's really not that, and nor should it be that. That's too exaggerated or too extreme. The term you used was exaggerated. What must happen is that a person has a state of contentment and can anchor oneself in both the misery and the joy of human life and learn how to traverse it, navigate it. And that's a state of happiness. It's almost better to call it contentment or tranquility rather than this frenetic emotional high that the Western world is telling us we should be achieving at all times. So I think the older generations of my parents and the parents before knew this perfectly well, that things would not always go well in life. There were peaks and valleys in life, but they were still joyous people. They weren't running around smiling and doing jumping jacks all day, but
Yeah.
they certainly understood the nature of where their place was in life. And so they were contented people. And I think that's lost in modernism. It's this view that there's either a therapeutic regimen, a new pill, a new psychiatric formula that will make you happy all the time, but that, of course, is not the case. So I think that's where the book starts. It tries to lay out a measured view, almost an Aristotelian mean view of what it means to be happy versus distressed or depressed. It's somewhere in the middle of those two things rather than one or the other all the time.
So, how did we come this far? How did we distort the whole notion of happiness in the
I think there's a
modern
lot of
world?
forces behind that. One force is the psychiatric, psychological schools, there's this notion that they can't even accept that some people are just not as happy as other people. I think there is a therapeutic state that exists now where they see it as a remedy, and they've replaced this therapeutic state. They've replaced religion or spirituality or a belief in a higher power or a belief in our ultimate destiny. Because here, as both of these characters say, there's never true happiness. There's partial happiness. There's bits and pieces of it. But if you had that conversation with most young people today, they wouldn't even know what you were talking about. They wouldn't even see the metaphysical world as essential to their own temporal being. They would see it as maybe a myth. This has a lot to do, I think, with our loss of understanding of what truly does make us happy. And of course, we have replaced the pursuit of happiness with false gods, and that's the other theme that runs through this text. And I lay out it chapter by chapter in Finding Happiness. Fame is not going to make you happy. Money will not make you happy. Sex will not make you happy. And you go through each chapter and these myths that, if you're rich and powerful and famous, these are the false gods of modernism. And that's what gives us so much distress.
Well, your book's replete with enormous amount of statistics, and that speaks to your own background in criminal justice and data collection. They're just astonishing. It reinforces to me what's happening in our society, the surge in suicide rates, the drug epidemic, fentanyl, opioids, alcoholism, higher rates of anxiety and depression, and so on and so on.
And the correlations between the things that they drive after, such as promiscuity. Promiscuity, of course, is a favored practice in modernism. But yet promiscuity, the data in the text from all types of studies, even from secular institutions, showed that it's a sure path to depression, a sure path to an unhappy marital life, a sure path to all kinds of other things. It's kind of like the thread that comes out of even these secular social scientists who have said that if you live with people before you marry them, your chances of divorce are almost 7 times as much as if you just get married and work it out together from the beginning. So social science can lie and make up all kinds of stories, but the data is what drives the question. Just same with economics. How much money do you need? How much money do you have to be happy? There's been studies done on that, which are fully discussed in the text. What does power do to people? All these things are proven by quantitative as well as qualitative studies. And that's the reason I wrote it this way as well, because if I just talk about what Aristotle and Thomas said, they would just dismiss them as ancient old fogey men that aren't supposed to be listened to. And the other thing you'll notice in the Finding Happiness is I don't have a lot of their text. I just have little bits that get in shaded blocks. So every chapter has 2 or 3 or 4 quotes from Aristotle and Aquinas, 1 or 2 or 3 sentences at tops. And so they see very little of that text, but they see how that text correlates to the modern demographic and quantitative data that's throughout this text. So it's kind of like I was just talking to somebody about St. Augustine's great book, Contra Academicos, because the academics, when he even back in the 4th century, were arrogant and thought they knew everything, and he was on to them even in the 4th century. And so we're even on to them now.
Back then.
Yes, it's a wonderful book. Because I've been in universities a long time, and if there's one characteristic of academics I know is their unbridled arrogance. Their lack of humility, the simplicity of knowing very little. This is the one thing people talk about St. Thomas. He said, "I know nothing. I just know a little bit. That's it." So I think the book convincingly, and I appreciate you saying that, convincingly lays out the data to show, okay, you don't believe me, you don't believe them, why don't you look at your own people making your own studies? And I think that's one of the great tragedies too in universities, is this stuff is well documented and well known, and it's hidden from young people today, hidden from them as if it's almost an intentional ignorance that they're inflicting on them and replacing them with all these modern thinkers that are sure paths to complete depression.
Now, Is there a distinction to be drawn here? Do we have to be careful in separating clinical depression from sadness? Do we mix them up? But do you accept the notion that there is clinical depression?
Oh no, I have no question that there are neurological problems that lead to serious depression, that there are conditions in the psychological sector that can be identified, diagnosed, and they are legitimate things. There are chemical imbalances in people. There are trauma that they suffer from. I'm not going to for 1 second. So I really don't deal with the issue of clinical depression as much as simple yearning for joy, an absence of joy, a absence of purpose in human existence. Why am I here? What's my purpose? It's an emptiness of sorts too. That's another way of describing it.
Mm.
And so it is a sadness. It is a blankness that you see on so many people today. A lot of young people, they have no hope. It isn't that they're clinically depressed.
Yeah.
It's just that they have really no motivation for joy.
Oh, why is that exactly? Because they've young people, and all of us, maybe not all of us. Let's not be real here. But we have so many material things, at least in the West and in America. We've the good life in many cases, and we've a lot to live for, and a lot of entertainment and different exciting things. So why are young people not in this good place?
Well, because they've placed these things that you just mentioned, the entertainment, the material possessions, as the lead anchor in their human existence when something else has to be there. Something spiritual has to be there. God has to be there. The creator has to be there. And that's the last chapter of the book where we talk about the power of religion, the power of belief. Belief in a higher power is essential to happiness. Everything else comes up short. The Greeks and the Romans knew this. I've been teaching this week De Legibus, which is Cicero's one of his greatest works, and in it, throughout it, it's always referencing nothing can happen here that is permanent. Only in the next level with the supreme God will you ever be happy. So this is not a theme that I've invented. It's a theme where people thought they could replace God with other things, and they misprioritize the things that will make them happy. One of the very interesting things I have discovered in my assessment here is the nun study. I don't know if you've ever heard of it.
I read the nun study, and I'm glad you reminded me.
Yeah, it is very fascinating. And my students here and everywhere I've ever given a talk about this are so fascinated with this. Why is it? Why is it they don't die very early? Why is it that they're not depressed? Why is it, in other words, what the nun last week in France, she died. She was 118 years old. Did you see that?
I did. I wish I could have blown out one of the candles when she was 116.
So they've been Harvard University has been studying these nuns since 1938.
Yeah.
As they enter the order and leave the order and die, but they take so long to die. Their longevity is extraordinary. Their mental depression is near zero. Even when they have the pathological signs of Alzheimer's and dementia, they don't exhibit it.
Yeah.
It's almost miraculous, and I think it's because the nuns have their priorities right when they give their lives to children, teach in schools, help the poor, do whatever it is that they're doing. They're so selfless in how they carry out their lives. I mean, I've encountered so many great nuns here at Franciscan, I can't tell you. It's amazing to me. And I think their priorities are right. But young people, their priorities aren't right. They're on the phone more than they are thinking about God.
Yeah. And that said, of course, there are some exceptional young people too who defy that whole rule and go against the grain as well.
Yes, if you come and visit here, I almost cry every day I come here because I'm so happy to be here. I'm amongst some of the most amazing young people I have ever encountered. Their faith is so deep and so obvious to me that I was starting to give up. But I'm not giving up at all because we're preparing these people to go into the world and transfer this energy they have towards their faith and Catholicism to other occupations. It's extraordinary what's going on here. It's not a perfect place like any place, but it's, of all the places I've ever taught, I don't think I've ever encountered one that is so joyous. That's the word I could use.
Quickly remind our listeners and viewers about your college. I know Dr. Scott Hahn is one of your esteemed colleagues.
Right. And Scott Hahn, I have to give him a public thanks. He is the one who referred this text for me to Sophia Institute Press. So I am always grateful to him. And of course, he is a scholar of the highest level in his own right. But Franciscan University is, a university with about 4,000 students. It's a residential campus. And our students come from all 50 states and about 30 countries. It is not a regional college. I'm astounded every day how many students I get from every state in the union, and they're coming here for a reason. It isn't just the Catholic faith; it's the mission of the university to go into the world and rebuild the world as well as the church. And it's a very contagious thing. I mean, I'm more of a traditionalist. More of the Latin Mass type, but I'm very welcome here. There are many approaches that go on here. There are the more kind of the praise and worship students here. There's the Latin students here. There's the Marianites. But our students, if they exhibit any tendencies whatsoever, it is to be spiritual. And I think that's why there's such joy here.
Yeah, well, that's just wonderful to hear that. I'm reminded of Dr. Anna Lemke, who was a guest on my show, and she wrote a book on this topic of dopamine nation. I mean, just how in our society in the West today, we're indulging so much in social media, pleasure, alcohol, promiscuity, just an overindulgence. It's given people greater dopamine hits to the extent that we overload on it, and it creates these anxiety disorders and a level of imbalance. So I asked you, where all of this was coming from. So I suppose that's part of the answer. It's modern living too contributes to this Great Depression we're seeing all around us.
Yeah, and I think the therapeutic state intervenes rather than the spiritual state. And the therapeutic state's first inclination is to prescribe a pill. Mm-hmm. Or to put you into a therapeutic regimen of some sort where you don't ever talk about the spiritual dimension, the real and ultimate purpose of human life. If you don't know what the ultimate purpose of human life is, you're bound to be distressed. You're never going to be happy. You're going to be, as Cicero said over and over and over, you'll fear death. But one who believes in the afterlife and who believes in the supreme God embraces death. And that's a Christian concept as well, that we should never be afraid of dying because we're only here temporarily. But you can't really explain that to people who don't have that exposure. I also fault what I would call the happy talk theology that is often taught in our high schools and grade schools. And while it is good to be positive about things, one also has to be honest with students to tell them, these types of behaviors are not acceptable. You will end up being depressed, and you need to follow the teachings of Catholicism, the Catechism of the Catholic Church, the wise wisdom that have come down from the church fathers and church dogmatics. These are not irrelevant things. If anything, the Catholic Church has done well in its 2,000-year history is to amass a body of instruction. While not everybody perfectly follows it, idyllically, it's unparalleled. There is no other, religious group in the world that has this comprehensiveness. And so even a lot of Catholic students who land up going to Catholic high school and Catholic grade school, I saw it because I have 7 kids and they all went through it. Yeah. And I just saw the decline of the rigor, I guess is the way of describing what they learned in their religion classes or their theology classes. And it's distressing to me that they would go through school and never, ever encounter St. Augustine or not read anything from St. Thomas. And that's similarly true in the seminaries. The seminaries have suffered from this as well. They abandoned St. Thomas after Vatican II for the most part. And they went more towards a modern clinical social cultural mentality, and this has been very destructive
Mm.
to the church as well. I think the church is starting to discover that we must return to first principles in order to be the great institution we always have been. That's what makes Catholics so unique, I think, is that mixture of art, culture, society, and the influence the church has on day-to-day living. And I think the church has lost its power in that area. And I also think I hear from young people all the time, even here, they are somewhat distressed about the state of the episcopacy, not dealing with the sexual, crimes against children, the problems that have happened in the church, the pedophilia crisis. They're not convinced that the church has been honest. And to be honest with you, I'm not convinced either. I know there are certain bishops, like we had Bishop Cordileone here from San Francisco, and he was beyond remarkable. I don't think I've encountered a bishop like him in a long, long time. But it was wonderful to hear him, and he was honest, direct with them, told them the truth. And I think the church needs to do more of that. And our kids will start, because I see our young people, as some, not all of them, but there's a little bit of an estrangement, even when you love the church, when there's not honesty in the church. That has something to do with it too, when you start losing your trust in institutions. And you also see that in the secular institutions, the schools, the public schools, how they're operating, how the FBI is operating, how the courts and judges are operating. These things are distressing to young people. They're not stupid. They can see that there are two different standards operating.
Yeah, that's interesting that you bring that up, and it might explain the continual decline in church attendance and how young people are not going in large numbers. Certainly, they didn't, I guess, in the last 20 years, but it seems to be a steeper decline in more recent years. So the question then, of course, on that is, how do we nip that terrible problem in the bud, that the leadership of the church shows that yes, pedophilia is not acceptable, good behavior is acceptable, please trust us?
I don't think they have that trust right now.
Mhm.
I think there are too many people that have slid through the bureaucratic cracks and
Mm.
or been placed in other positions. And I think students aren't stupid. They see this. Young people see this. I hear it from my own children. They'll say, "Well, I love the church, but why are they not dealing with this directly the way they should?" And that starts right at the top.
Mm.
Somebody's going to have to come in someday and say, "I don't care what it costs. We're going to solve this problem. We're going to correct this problem." What always bothers me, of course, I teach criminal law every semester, and every semester there's a large unit on sexual offenses against children. What always bothers me is why people aren't, not us, not you and me, but why our leaders don't seem to be very angry about it. And I've never been able to answer that question, except for two reasons. One is that they're morally dead. They don't seem to have the outrage that most ordinary people have when they hear these stories. I mean,
Hmm.
the ordinary citizen, the ordinary church attendee does not like these stories. It's very disturbing to them. Or
Yeah.
there's another explanation, that there's a group of them that are engaged in the very same behavior. If you look at it as a criminal justice person, those are the only two explanations you can come up with. So either way, it's not a good sign for the church. And people, they think that we don't know this.
Hmm.
And this is a major problem in honesty in the church. And until it's dealt with, and I think we deal with it pretty well here. Father Dave, who's the president here at Franciscan, he is very direct about this stuff. He's
Hmm.
unapologetic in condemning it. And I think we need to hear much more of that. We need to hear our church leaders come out and stick it to them and say, "You're done, you're finished." And that's why we pray every day. Our motto here is rebuild the church one brick at a time. And that's what we're doing.
So, finishing up on that, while it caused great distress and pain when law enforcement and various district attorneys brought up their investigations, and there was charges and criminal charges and settlements, in the end, that helped lead us in some ways to a solution, but there's a ways to go.
Well, if we read St. Thomas, the idea salvific action is to come out and say everything that is true about it. The people must repent. They must tell the truth. I mean, look at a guy like McCarrick. McCarrick right now, he's allegedly incompetent. Okay, he can't stand trial now. So
Yeah.
I'm not sure I believe it, but I do know that he's going to his grave without ever saying what really happened. And that type of dishonesty has to be cured for his soul as well as the church's soul.
Yeah.
And I think this is a major issue with young people. I do. I just hear it too much. I have conversations about it, not because I want to, because I'm a loyal Catholic. I believe that Pope Francis is our Pope. Do I like his governance? No, I do not. But he is the Pope, and that's all there is to it. Do I have to think that everybody in the church is a saint? No, I don't believe that either. But I do think we need a body of people that are strong enough and honest enough to take this problem, because it's a major problem. It's not a problem that's gone away. And then I think you'll find young people as well as older people who walked away will get their faith back and come back to church.
Well, I'll finally conclude on this, because you just brought up something there. It hasn't gone away. So are you saying that there's still pedophilia practices?
Of course there is, yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
I mean,
this is
there's
really
just been cases in the last month that have come out. And the problem with these pedophiles, or to look at it from a criminalistic perspective, they can't stop. There's no curing them. There's no fixing them. You can't send them to St. Elizabeth Hospital in Washington, D.C., or send them anywhere.
Yeah. They
have these propensities, this darkness that is so deep that it is probably, of all the addictions, probably the worst of all of them. I mean, it just can't be controlled, even because they rationally, like I've represented some pedophiles as a lawyer over the years, and they will tell me, I know this is wrong. I know it, but I can't control myself.
Wow.
And that's really why it's a tough problem to solve. The only cure for it is you're out and gone. There's no fixing you.
Yeah.
Well, that's another story. But anyways, you could ask me what leads to young people feeling, and then the money problems too. Sometimes they read about the finance problems and people moving money in the wrong directions, using it for things that it doesn't belong for, or using it to settle cases when people are giving money to the church. I become extremely selective about where my money goes. And I am very generous with the church, but I want to make sure it's going to the right places. So.
Well, you are absolutely right. And these are good cautionary warnings for us all. And finding happiness in a complex world. Do you think the pharmaceutical industry has a stake in perpetuating unhappiness in the general population, insofar as they keep selling and merchandising mass drug use?
Well, they have a natural conflict. I mean, they're not going to make money if people aren't all being medicated. And if one believes that's the solution to making a person happy, I personally don't believe that. I'm not talking about, as you mentioned early on, I'm not talking about the people that are diagnosable with neurological and clinical depression.
Yeah.
But I'm talking about the person who says, I'm just not happy. Okay, well, take this pill. You'll be happy. That's only a mask. It doesn't work. It's a facade. Eventually what'll happen is you'll be back in the same place, and you need another pill, which is a little stronger, and then another pill, which is stronger than that. But it'll always fade away because it doesn't deal with the fundamental reason that you're sad. And I don't mean that in a psychological sense. I mean in a sense of your own priorities. I mean, that's the one thing that finding happiness does. It goes through every false god there is that people hear about today and destroys it. Okay, you think money's going to make you happy? Look what happens here. I mean, look what happens to the professional football players, the professional hockey players, the NBA. How many of them go bankrupt in 3 years after they're gone?
Yeah, exactly. And people who win the lottery in many cases.
Oh, that's an amazing story. The lottery winners, that's quoted in here.
Yeah.
They're depressed. Their suicide rate goes up. Their money is all squandered. They lose all their money. They never ever get anything out of the money. And in fact, it's almost a perfect formula for complete depression.
You mentioned the mental health professionals, psychiatrists, psychologists, and so on. So when the classic patient goes into their office and says they're anxious, depressed, or so on, and they professionally diagnose them, we hope, and they may be clinically depressed, and perhaps there's a case for medication. Are there any instances where they talk about our existential crisis, a higher power, tell us about your faith? Tell us, do you believe in God or do you not believe in God? Should they be discussions the typical mental health professional has?
I don't think the typical one does, but there are groups in the Christian community, evangelical psychotherapists, Catholic psychotherapists, and psychiatrists that do adopt this posture. They're the extreme minority. But for the most part, psychiatry and psychology or behavioral, quote, sciences, end quote. So there is this vision that they can quantify why you're depressed. And most of what I'm talking about here is it's a subjective series of recommendations. Obviously, Aristotle and Aquinas, neither of them had any psychological or psychiatric backgrounds, but this was all collected by their observation of human life and what happens to people when they engage in certain behaviors. One of the examples I put in here is this false notion that a prostitute can be happy.
Yeah.
Impossible.
Yeah.
Impossible, because they're enslaved to their sense of money. They're enslaved to their bodies. Other people objectify them and turn them into mud. They're become big nothings in the end. It's the same as the porn industry. These individuals, everybody thinks they're happy. They're not happy. They kill themselves 3-4 times more than the average population. Almost everybody that's in the industry is on drugs, alcohol problems. But I don't think that when they go to the psychiatrist, there's any discussion about the moral truths of a loving God. Unless you go, it's funny. I do talk about one former porn star in this book, and her name is Brittany De La Mora, and she's now a minister, a pastor out in Los Angeles. She was in the porn industry about 14 years, and now she runs a church where she does nothing but help people who have this problem or in the adult industry. And her whole thrust is to look at God and see, is God as your salvation? And she's a very joyous person now, but she was a really messed up person while she was in the industry. So it's kind of like how our prisons run too. We're always, we have 2.1 million people in prison in the United States. How much of it is spiritually based when it comes to rehabilitation? Very little.
Yeah.
And most of the stuff is therapeutic and it doesn't work, never has worked, never will work. But the religion does work for many of them, like Chuck Colson's prison fellowship program.
Yeah.
It's extremely effective. So, if you have a program that drives you towards the ultimate end of your human purpose, you'll get happy.
One of the takeaways I have from your book is this notion of finding the mean, finding a balance in life. It's not doing everything in excess. You're not a killjoy, there is room for, entertainment and whatever in its proper balance. But if we overdo it on either side, too much wealth, and we lose our moral compass, then that's a problem.
That's for both Aquinas and Aristotle. That's the theory of excess and defect. Just like the Shakers were defective when it came to sexuality, because the Shakers as a community, I don't know if you remember the Shakers from Ohio, they didn't believe sex could be done. So now there's 2 left. So if you're not having any sexuality, you're done. You extinguish yourself from the face of the earth. So they're no longer, and I think they're both 89 or 90. So they're done. All right. So, but on the other hand, you just can't promiscuously have children with 27 different husbands or wives and doing anything you want anytime. That's not good either. That's the excess. That's the insanity. Here again, the church provides the parameters for finding the middle ground, and that's in marriage.
Mm-hmm.
Marriage, there's another theme that runs through this text. If you're married, you'll live longer, you will be happier. If you have children, you will be happy, or if you serve children. That's another thing I've learned in this book. It is not just having children, it's giving yourself to others, being selfless, being charitable to the point. It's not always about you. So yes, it is a question of finding the mean, as Aristotle would put it, finding the thing. But of course, some behaviors are not subject to the mean. You can't be a mean pedophile. You can't be. I only rape once a month. I mean, these they're not even measured in the mean. But you can be a mean. By mean, I don't mean mean. Mean. I mean, you can be a middle ground drinker. You don't have to be a temperance prohibitionist, nor do you have to be an alcoholic. You can learn to balance both worlds, have some, but not have it all the time. You can learn. I always tell my students the example: what candy can I put in front of me that I can't control myself? It's M&M peanuts. So you put a bowl of those in front of me, I can't eat just 3 or 4. So I said, of course, I have many other moral problems as well. I mean, that's the least of my vices, but it's absolutely true. It's finding the balance between joy, pleasure. There's nothing wrong with pleasure. That's another myth about Catholics, that we hate sex, which is ridiculous. Catholics like sex more than most people. And the reason why they like it is because they often combine the purpose of sex in the first place, which is to have a family, to have children, to be open to the natural consequences of sexuality. And there's great joy in that. I mean, as a father of 7 children, I guarantee you there's better joy than that, than trying to stop everything all the time and abort everything.
So true. So true. You mentioned the nun study and the happiness of those nuns in that study. Where are some of the other happy communities in America? Because I find some irony in the fact that, I hope I'm not generalizing, because there are exceptions within this community. New York City in general is not a very happy place. It's a very restive type of population. Okay. And maybe the same goes for San Francisco, right? But then you go into the Midwest and some more the flyover country, if you will. I've found some of the most happy communities in America there, and they're not exactly wealthy, a lot of them.
There's a lot of truth to that, because there's simplicity and a balance between how much you have and don't have. And you were mentioning New York City. Of course, I spent 11 years in New York City at John Jay in the city. And yes, I agree with you. There's a lot of unhappiness, and it's getting worse, not better. But one of the groups I met when I was at John Jay were the Sisters for Life, which Cardinal, doggone, he just slipped my mind.
O'Connor.
Yeah, O'Connor founded. If you ever met the Sisters for Life, you can do nothing but smile. And we have a group of nuns here who you were asking about other groups. The Dominican nuns have come out here, the Immaculate Heart of Mary, and they do Catholic schools. That's all they do. They have resurrected the old, not the harsh thing, but the traditional way Catholic schools used to operate, and they're growing like nuts. They have 162 nuns, and their average age is like 33. They are so joyous. They came and visited with me here because we have some of them on our campus getting their master's degrees, and they live in Weirton, West Virginia, which is right across the line, and they have a mission there. And so they came up to me and they brought me a cake. And I said, "What are you giving me a cake for?" He says, "Well, because you've been a generous donor to us." And I said, "Well, it's a joy to give you money because of what you're doing." They're the happiest people. They are just, it exudes from them. And it isn't just them. It's nurses that I know. If you think about occupations that are happy, nurses are a very happy lot as a group.
Yeah.
Believe it or not, police officers are a fairly happy lot, even though they're under a lot of stress, because they're in it for the right reasons. They see, the ones that are, they see their life as the Catholic faith in action. And in New York City, you have so many Catholic police officers. That was one of the great things that I liked dealing with when I was at John Jay. All the different ethnic groups that were Catholic, and they saw themselves on a mission. Not just a mission to be a cop, but a mission to help society and to help those in distress. Those people tend to be happier than those that don't. the ones that are serving others are always happier. I've really learned that in doing this book and all through my life. The ones that are self-centered, look at me in the mirror, look at me on stage, look at me in my powerful position, they're generally not happy.
So selfless acts of love and giving and charity.
Correct. Correct.
Interesting. You mentioned the Sisters of Life. I've met some of them, and yeah, I would have the same reaction. So if we can create this flourishing vocation culture within the Sisters of Life and the Dominicans and so on, what's going on among the priesthood? I mean, vocations are falling off the cliff. Is there a template there in
Well,
what
I
the
think
Sisters of Life are doing?
yeah, I mean, I think some groups like the Benedictines, have been growing. St. Vincent's out here in Latrobe, Pennsylvania, is a large arch abbey. They have a lot of young people moving into it because they have a way of life, a rule of life. They have structure. And I think when you have structure, you got a better chance than if you don't have structure. And that's the other thing that nuns and religious groups do is they have a structured lifestyle. Most of your diocesan priests don't have many controls. I mean, they may be subject to the bishop, but they don't have to take a vow of poverty. They don't even take a vow of chastity. They don't. I mean, the diocesan priests, they don't have to take it. And
Wait, no, I have to stop you there, Dr. Nemeth. They don't have to take a vow of chastity?
well, they take a celibacy promise, but they don't take the vow the same way that the nuns do. And I don't see it as the same thing. They do promise that they're celibate, but that doesn't mean, I don't think they have a formal vow of chastity when they go. I may be wrong about that, but my understanding of it is that they certainly don't take a vow of poverty. They can amass all the material wealth they want, and quite a few of them have amassed a great deal of material wealth.
Yeah.
And not all of them, but some of them have.
Percentage, sure.
Yeah, many of our priests.
I mean, there's nothing to stop you there, Dr. Nemeth, because it's an important points of distinction here. So a priest, a diocesan priest in theory, could run a stock scheme, a legal one, or could invest in property, I guess, with his whatever stipend he gets.
Oh, absolutely. I know many priests that have houses at the beach. and then they, and you always say, how'd you get a house at the beach, in New Jersey, or how did you afford that, and where did that come from? And this is another one of the suspicions that sometimes people have, but they don't have the same suspicions when it comes to people living a more simple life, because the individuals living a simple life are living a more of a Christian dynamic rather than a materialist dynamic. So again, this is my observation. It doesn't mean it's scientific. It doesn't mean that every priest is like, they're not like this. The majority of priests are good, trying to do the right thing, et cetera, et cetera. But what is attracting, the question that you were asking me is what attracts people to the priesthood in order to bolster the vocational numbers, because we have a crisis in this. There's no question about it. Well, my answer to that is look to the orders that are growing, and they'll tell you pretty much what my book tells you. This is how you live your life. This is who are the orders that are growing. Not many, but there are orders that are falling off the charts in terms of the seminaries filling up, and so forth and so on. I think part of the problem being strictly diocesan is you're too worldly. You're too much part of the world rather than separate from the world.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying anything that other people haven't said.
Yeah.
Because if you don't, in other words, when you're part of an order, everything you make goes to the order. It's not your money. It's part of a collective system. I don't mean in a communist way, but it's all shared amongst the group, and they take care of each other.
Yeah.
But that's not how the diocesan world works. So, and I think that's where our greatest crisis presently exists. It exists in the diocesan decline rather than the orders decline. Now, some orders are off the.
Yeah. And
they're
when
so
you say all of
crazy.
that,
What's that?
and when you say all of that, I do know various diocesan priests who are extremely charitable, generous, and humble, and for all intents and purposes might as well be living as if they're in some kind of a cloistered monastery kind of rule.
Right.
But you seem to be proposing here reforms of the diocesan model so that we create a better sense of vocation to begin with.
Well, and I have no claim to knowing exactly what to do, but I've learned anything over the years dealing with so many priests in my lifetime, it's the holy ones that I always remember.
Yeah,
The ones who lived holy and lived in virtue and didn't care about any of the things that course their way through this book.
yeah,
Power,
and
status, fame. They didn't care. Didn't care. So I
yeah,
think one of the reasons why people like Pope Benedict so much, no matter how powerful he was always very gracious and very simple, even though he was a highly complicated intellectual.
hmm
But he never came across that way, nor did John Paul II come across that way. So,
Well, John Paul II was an example of somebody who lived in great humility and led a life of poverty in a sense. He
yeah,
didn't amass any wealth.
no, no. He was like I said, we've had so many examples of how to do it, but we've also had some examples of how not to do it.
Yeah,
So,
exactly. Finding happiness in a complex world. Rules from Aristotle and Aquinas. Next time you're back, we'll talk maybe more about Aristotle and St. Thomas Aquinas. One final takeaway, what would it be for the readers of this book? Anything that you would recommend them
well,
to kind of
I
take
would
away from it?
I would recommend that people see these two people as being very distinct individuals from two different traditions. Obviously, Aristotle was a pagan, and he believed in a supreme being and a prime mover. He had a very detached and, certainly not God the Father, as we Catholics and Christians understand. Uh, but of course, Aquinas is the angelic doctor of the Roman Catholic Church. He is considered the greatest intellectual force the Catholic Church has ever had. And yet, these two dynamics merge together and are in complete compatibility. This is one of the reasons I wrote this book, because if I just put Aquinas in it, people would have walked away and said he's nothing but a papist churchman. I don't want to hear about it. But now that you have this pagan and him combined, and they're all reaching the same exact conclusions, this is something that should empower people to believe this is true. This is not just my opinion. This is tested and tried in history since the time before Aristotle was born. And it works. I mean, if everybody wants a remedy, this is the remedy. Is it easy to follow it? No, because we all fail and we all sin and we all make mistakes. And by no means am I indicating in this book, in order for you to be happy, you have to be perfect. Because you're looking at a person that isn't perfect, me. But I tend to be more contented than most people I know because I follow the rules.
And you can still dip into those M&Ms in that time.
That and an Irish whiskey and assorted other things. So I can enjoy my life very, very, very much so. When you go to excess or defect, there's no joy at all.
Dr. Nemeth, thank you.